Hi everyone, Plastic EP here from Melbourne, Australia. Let me tell you, I have the beautiful Jenny Boyd, 1960s model, sister of Patty. How are you today, Jenny?
I am very well this morning. Thank you, Plastic.
Now, I just want to tell you, I want to talk about your brand new, fabulous book, Juniper, which I know you've got a copy there to show me.
I do indeed. I do. Juniper, A Journey Beyond the Muse. And then it's got a little piece here from Mick Fleetwood about the book.
Fantastic. And what's inside it?
Well, let's have a look. How about this?
How about that? Look at that. It's a Plastic EP from Jenny Boyd. I love Australia. You know what? Thank you so much for that.
My pleasure.
Now, I've got to ask you about the book. Please tell me how long it took to write and what you covered in the book.
Okay, well, actually, when I first started writing it was many years ago, and I began by just writing down memories. I didn't even think it was going to be a book. And gradually, because I was working for an addictions treatment center in America at that time, although I was living in England, so I didn't have a lot of time to write, but whenever I could, I would write more memories down. And then gradually over the years, after trying it as fiction and then something else, then I decided I'm going to have it as a memoir. And I went straight with it. And so actually, once I decided it was going to be a memoir, I would say probably took about 3 years. Because I would edit it, change it, take things out, put things in. And now, until I got it how I wanted it.
And could I ask you, it covers basically your life being a model and into 1968 India as well, doesn't it?
Well, it does. So it starts off with being a model in the sort of, 1964, 65, and the fun we had, and Patty had met George, and we all go to clubs together. I was going out with Mick Fleetwood. We were both like 16 when we first met, and so we'd go to clubs and with the rest of the Beatles, and there were kind of all these exclusive clubs, like the Scotch St. James's, the Crazy Elephant, and then I actually decided time needed to come because I had what I called like a spiritual awakening when I was like 18. And decided modeling wasn't for me. And it just so happened a friend of mine said, who lived in San Francisco, said, oh, I need someone to help me open my boutique. And so I went to San Francisco, and it was the beginning of 1967 in March. So it just happened to be, I had no idea what was going on. And there were all these people who'd experienced the same sort of thing as I had. So it was all very timely. So I was there for 6 months, and, I was on this search, like a lot of people were at that time. And the funny thing is, and I talk about it in the book, I kept writing to Patty and George saying, this is so amazing here. You have to come. They've really, they're so creative, and there's a whole spiritual thing, and kept asking them to come and come to San Francisco with me, be there. They didn't come till August. By that time, everybody had been told to turn on, tune in, and drop out, like right across America. And so instead of all the original, beautiful, flower power hippies, there were these like mass of people, college kid dropouts, begging on the street. So then when Patty and George came, and Magic Alex, not so magic, but anyway, and a couple of other people, we walked along Haight-Ashbury, and of course we all had to take a little bit of acid because they thought that's what you had to do. And it was terrible. It was really awful. So I described that whole walk down Haight-Ashbury and what happened. Anyway, so then when I came back, I flew back with them. We all flew back together. And it wasn't long after that, we went to go and hear Maharishi speaking in London. And he said he would like us all to come to Bangor in Wales and learn how to meditate and be initiated. So that was when we went there. And I don't think Maharishi knew that much about the Beatles before he asked them to come. But then when we all got on the train at Euston Station, he could see just like crowds and crowds of kids screaming. We're trying to get on the train. Cynthia gets left behind because the crowd kind of sweeps her around. And we get to Bangor, and so I talk about that. And so then I worked in the Apple boutique for about 3 months before we actually went to India. And then our trip to India, which was just amazing, incredible. And of course, that's where I met Paul Saltzman. And then after that, that was what I call the innocence of the 60s. And then I get into the decadence of the 70s. And that's when Mick Fleetwood and I kind of got back together, and Fleetwood Mac had formed. And I talk about, us all moving to Los Angeles and the craziness of Fleetwood Mac suddenly taking off. And really, it's a journey, it's a journey to finding myself. And I start the book by saying, when George did say, would you like to come to India? I said, how can I ever thank you? It was like a dream come true, when we'd come back from Wales. And he said, just be yourself. And I think that's been my mantra throughout the book, throughout the journey, is learning to just be yourself. Just be who you are.
That's the best advice you can give to anyone. Now, I've got to say, with the movies, Austin Powers and all these fantastic 60s movies, you lived it. Yourself and your sister were top English models, like at the top of the tree. How fantastic was that in photo sessions? I can only imagine how great that would have been.
It was fun, but you know what I love to do, Plastic? The most favorite thing was when I'd asked to show clothes or, like do the catwalk. I didn't like doing the catwalk. It was much too sort of stiff for me. And by then they were starting to play like really great music. And so I just danced. Along each platform. So I became known as the model that danced instead of did the catwalk. And it would be either on railway stations in Rome or in Belgium or wherever. And so that was my thing, because to me, that gave me joy.
But what a free-flowing spirit you are. And I've got to say, how is it that Donovan writes Jennifer Juniper, which is the title not only of your book, but he writes the song for you in 1968, comes out as a single. It's on the album, Hurdy Gurdy Man, and you are in pop culture embedded forever just in that song. How groovy is that?
That's incredible. And whenever I hear that song, you do. And then I've heard of, women who, I've met them, who called their daughter Juniper. But when I hear that song, it reminds me of course, first of all, it's like, this is my song, and it feels like some treasure that you take with you into your life. But also it reminds me of that time where it was such innocence, it was an incredibly innocent time. So it's a very precious song to me.
And also, how's the comparison? George Harrison writes a song, Something, for Patty. I mean, how amazing is your family? How beautiful you ladies are. No, I mean it, because I have to talk about pop culture and the significance of what it is. Because in 20 or 30 years' time, people will be watching this interview and listening to what you've got to say. It's just you ladies, and like, I can't tell you what sort of beautiful spirits you were in the 60s and free-flowing, and you get magazines. I've seen magazines, photos of you girls. Even there's one of all the Beatle women, and you're in it. A whole photo, you know the one I'm talking about? That's what, how can I say? That's like something out of this world.
Yeah, and of course at the time, you don't think of it because, you're 17, 18, 19, you're just living your life, and that's what's happening in your life. So you don't think one day in 50 years' time, we'll be talking about this. You just don't think like that when you're young, do you? At all.
No, but I just to be able to talk to you is like a dream. I feel like you're taking me back to the 60s, because I'm saying, I know how old I was in 67. I was 8, 9 years old, right? And you ladies were modeling. So I'm like a baby, you know what I mean? So that's why it's really great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I've got to ask you some questions.
The funny thing is that I never planned to be a model. It just so happened. I was kind of, I was still at school, and I was asked if I'd go for this interview. These two fashion designers who were looking for a house model So it wasn't about being a photographic model, but somehow, call it fate, call it one just had a certain look, whatever it is, I kind of fell into it. And it's funny because you talk about Patty and I, it's like our lives were very parallel in many ways, unintentionally.
But can you imagine being a photographer and they're photographing Patty and she happens to mention, I've got a sister. And then you come along and it's like double vision. This is like something that's unique. That's how I picture it. Am I right or not?
Sort of, but I think, I mean, the one we did a lot of modeling together. And in actual fact, when I was working for Foal and Tuffin, the designers, it was me that said, I've got a sister, you know. So it's like, then we went to New York together, and we were the Foal and Tuffin models, and then they had some Mary Quant models. There were 4 of us. And being in New York in 1965, I think it was, and all the Motown, you know, we hadn't heard that music in England because that wasn't, it was only, I remember when Patty showed me that when the Beatles came back from America, they'd come back with these like acetates of, or 45s, and they'd have like a big hole in the middle. Right here, we just had like the little hole. And it would be hearing Motown for the first time was incredible. It just makes you want to dance. It was all very new.
Now I've got to ask you some questions as a pop person. What was it like when Patty's on a hard day's night and George really fell in love with her and Patty was telling you for the first time about George? Can you remember that?
Yeah, she said, do you want to come? Do you want to meet him? And so I was like, yeah, of course, you know, it's like my sister's new boyfriend. And so she was sharing a flat with a girlfriend of hers. And I went over there and I met him. And my first impression was, wow, he's so small. Because, you know, when someone's famous, they become larger than life. I don't know what I expected. And slender. And when I shook his hand, it's like I felt I wanted to hug him, like, hello, because you feel, because you've seen their picture all over the place, that you know them. But he was so lovely and so nice to be with and so easy to be with. And so it was great. And then he'd come around to our house for like Sunday lunch. And our younger sister, Paula, so I was probably about 16, our younger sister was what, 10, 9, about 12 years old. So she was the one like, ooh, it was so exciting. And there was a photograph of her, I remember, in the paper, surrounded by all her friends, her little sort of 12-year-old friend going, she's the most favorite girl in the class because her sister is going out with a boyfriend. So it was more that age that was really kind of, oh, I want to cut the lock off his hair, you know. So, so I think for me, I was more kind of having crushes on sixth form boys, you know, that was more important to me. But it was nice meeting George. He just felt like you'd meet your sister's new boyfriend. And it was only when he'd talk about the tour they'd just come off and how scary it was because nobody had an idea or a clue that there was going to be the Beatlemania that there was, that you realize, wow, he's one of the Beatles. But most of the time, it wasn't like that.
But let me say, talking about Beatlemania, you were there because what was it like when you met the other 3 Beatles? That's what I want to know.
Well, I think I might have met them. I can't remember exactly when, but it was probably when I was going out with Mick, because Mick had seen me going to school and decided I was the girl he was going to marry. You know, this was before he joined Fleetwood Mac or became part of Fleetwood Mac. But we'd go to clubs, and I think I might have met them when we'd all share a table at the clubs. So I sort of met them then. And then I'd get to see quite a bit of them because, of course, they'd all hang out together a lot. But I was very shy, so I wouldn't say very much. I was more like the observer.
Would you say your sister was more than outgoing because she was a bit older?
She was definitely more outgoing than I was. I was sort of painfully shy. but then I was very young, you know. It was sort of like I'd been sort of scooped into, I wouldn't call it a grown-up world, because we weren't like grown-ups at all. But, you know, I'd left school early, and I was suddenly in this whole world.
Amazing. What an amazing life in the 60s. And now we move on to, let's say, 1968. You go there to Rekikesh, right? You're with the Beatles. And then, as I said, Paul Saltzman there taking photos. And it's so laid back. And it's like a different world, isn't it? Explain that to me.
Completely different world. You know, because we had like all the Beatles and their wives, girlfriends, we had our own sort of little set of rooms around our bungalow. And we'd sort of, you know, in the mornings, we'd all go up and sit on the roof of the bungalow, and you'd have so beautiful. You'd have the Himalayas there and the River Ganges. You could sort of hear it there. And they'd have their guitars. And in the early morning sun, we would just listen to them playing. And the amazing thing is that the songs that they played and they came up with, like one song, one morning, John said he didn't sleep very well last night. And so he started writing a song about, I didn't sleep well last night. Or, you know, then later on there was Prudence. And so all their songs were what was going on in the ashram at that time. So I wrote a book many years afterwards about musicians and the creative process. And I interviewed George for it, and I interviewed Ringo, and lots of different, about 75 different sort of well-known musicians. And I remember it reminded me of when I was watching them play their music, how they were so oozing with creativity that anything, they could do a song about a stone or a pebble or something, you know. It was just, they had this ability, and especially when they were together, of just this incredible music coming out of them.
Amazing. And I said, with Paul, he's got the new documentary coming out now, Meeting the Beatles, and you'll be doing questions and answers after that. That's correct?
Yeah. Yes. So I think that's on let's see, on the 9th, on Tuesday.
So not far to go to the documentary.
Wednesday.
Have you already seen the documentary?
Yes, it's wonderful.
How
and
wonderful.
It takes you right back, you know, it really does. It's very special. And of course, I've had his book for years, you know, with his photographs. And he just captures those moments. And obviously,
we know about the Beatles. We know about the Beatles Magical Mystery Tour. But let me tell you, the impression I'm getting of India, it was more magical and special.
It was unbelievable. You know, I write about it in the book, and there's so much of it that is still very vivid to me. And I could have just stayed there for the rest of my life, you know. It was that incredible. But I'll tell you another funny story about just showing how creative they were, just in everything that they were doing. When we were meditating, and we would meditate for longer and longer, you know, hours. And Maharishi would say, if you come out of your meditation and you feel really bad, or you can't sleep, you know, like we thought John was going through, what he called was an iceberg. And then what you have to do is kind of go back into your meditation, and then it's like knots, you know, of unresolved stuff. And so I had decided I was going to do a 3-day, 3-night meditation at some point. And I was sort of I'd meditated during the day, and then through the night, I started to feel really bad, you know, and just headache and fever and terrible. I was sitting on the floor, very basic rooms, and leaning against my bed. And I thought, I've got to go find Maharishi. It's like 4 a.m. So I went across the campus, found Maharishi. He got woken up. And I said, you know, I really don't feel very well. And I'm like, sweat pouring down me, terrible. And he said, oh, no, you're just hitting an iceberg. Go back and keep meditating. So I went back, and I was sitting on the floor, and just terrible. And then in the morning, Patty came in because she wanted to see if I wanted to have breakfast with her. She took one look at me and said, oh my God, you know, we've got to call the doctor. So I get into bed then, and the doctor comes, and he says, because we're miles from anywhere, and he says, you got tonsillitis. So I'm thinking, well, I had my tonsils out when I was 5, you know, and anyway, so I just kind of stayed in bed and kept sweating and hot and terrible, shivering. And then there happened to be another doctor who came to that day who said, you've got dysentery. So antibiotics and, you know, all that stuff. So I was in bed for a couple of days and different people would come and visit. And one day, John and Cynthia came into my room and John had this drawing and he said, I've something for you. He showed me this drawing and it was of this Indian man with a turban on his head and he's sitting cross-legged and he's got a basket and there's a snake picture of a snake coming out and he's playing his flute. And underneath he'd written, by the power that's in and the power that's out, I carve Tonsil Lighthouse out. Love, John and Sin.
Have you still got that?
No, I gave my mom to look after. And what happened? She wasn't very careful with the things. Like the Beatles all gave her the set of their albums, Love to Mum, you know, all this. You know, like our brothers' friends would come along and they'd take them and we'll bring them back and never did. So she wasn't very careful with her things that she had. But, you know, in my memory, I still have it. And I don't know, maybe she threw it away by mistake, threw a bit of paper. But anyway, that's just shows how in every way they were being creative, you know.
Well, I want everybody out there to go and buy Jenny's book, Jennifer Juniper. It's a fantastic book. And as I said, I can't wait for my copy because I'll be reading it from start to the end. And let me tell you, I've got to ask you, Jenny, could you tell me all your links and where the book's available from?
Well, I know they're on Amazon, of course. You know, during lockdown, they kept running out of Amazon, which was a shame. Then it would take ages for them to get stock up again. So hopefully Amazon, I mean, definitely Amazon, hopefully they've still, you know, they're stocked up again. I don't know where else. Do you I mean, bookshops, hopefully? I don't know.
They'll find it on the net. They'll find it on the net.
Yeah.
I found it on the net. It's got the prices, easy buying, not a problem. Now, one more question before we go, Jenny. Did you happen to meet the monkeys at all? Did you meet any of the monkeys?
I met years later Mickey Dolenz, but you know, fairly maybe just a few years ago.
Thank you so much again. We can't thank you enough. Australia thanks you, and I want you to know we love you down here. And you've already come to Sydney once before, haven't you?
Yes, yes, and loved it, and went to Byron Bay. Yeah, very cool.
I'm in Melbourne, so I can't say about Sydney, but all I want to say is thank you so much, Jenny. It was just a buzz for everybody.
And thank you. It was lovely to talk to you.
Pleasure.
Okay.